I'm 24 now, and for years, I genuinely believed we were a typical family, if not a particularly touchy-feely one. We weren't overtly cruel to each other. Birthdays were acknowledged, needs were met, and the happy family facade was trotted out whenever company came over. Nothing screamed dysfunctional from the rooftops, at least not in a way I could articulate. My brother, Blake, is 4 years older. Until recently, I would have sworn we were treated reasonably fairly, not identically, but within the bounds of what I considered normal sibling dynamics. Now, though, I realize they had me expertly gaslit. Looking back, I remember small, unsettling moments scattered throughout my childhood. Tiny inconsistencies that made me question my own perception. Whenever Blake and I argued, I was invariably the one forced to apologize, even when he was clearly the instigator or equally at fault. If I dared to defend myself, I was branded as difficult, overly dramatic, or just plain too sensitive. When Blake got into trouble at school, my parents were quick to defend him, blaming unfair teachers or stress. My transgressions, however, were met with lectures about responsibility and better choices. If Blake forgot something, my parents would drop everything to assist him. My forgetfulness was met with sighs and reminders about being more organized. This pattern continued for years, subtle enough that I dismissed it, but persistent enough to shape me. When you grow up with something, it feels normal. You don't think twice. Blake was obsessed with sports, which my parents encouraged. They attended every single game, weekend after weekend, cheering him on and arguing with referees. Meanwhile, I sang in the choir. They never once attended a performance. Excuses were always plentiful, but somehow, they never seemed too exhausted for Blake's football games. Eventually, I stopped asking. It simply wasn't worth the effort. As for Blake, he barely acknowledged me as a person. I was more of an inconvenience. Any attention I received was met with eye rolls or snide remarks. When I won a small award at a choir competition, he scoffed that nobody cares about choir. If I achieved a better grade than him, he'd sabotage my things, or mutter that I'd gotten lucky. It felt like he resented my very existence, as if I was occupying space that rightfully belonged to him alone. And my parents? They never intervened. They allowed it to continue, as if it were perfectly acceptable behavior. Even in conversations with family and friends, they were quick to shower Blake with praise, highlighting his talents, his intelligence, and his bright future. When they talked about me, I wasn't the focus. Instead, they emphasized how supportive I was of Blake, what a good sister I was, and how I was always there for him. It was as if my entire identity, in their eyes, revolved around being his shadow. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was imagining things. I convinced myself it wasn't that bad, that some families just have favorites, and that it didn't mean they didn't love me. I was just being overly sensitive, I thought. I really wish I'd trusted my instincts. Everything shifted a year ago when Blake was diagnosed with kidney disease. My parents were devastated. I was shocked too, of course. He underwent various treatments, medications, everything, but his condition continued to worsen. Eventually, the doctors informed them that he needed a kidney transplant. The moment they heard the word transplant, their gaze locked onto me. I remember sitting in the hospital room when the doctor mentioned it. My mom immediately turned to me, a smile already forming on her face, and asked, "Wouldn't it be amazing if you were a match?" She was already planning it, acting like it was a done deal, as if I were just there to save the day, just like I always had. My dad nodded in agreement, as if it were the most natural expectation in the world. Blake barely glanced up from his phone. I remember feeling so strange. The idea of not helping Blake wasn't something I could stomach. He's my brother, and the thought of losing him was terrifying. But the speed with which everyone decided this was my responsibility churned my insides. Felt less like a family matter and more like an assignment. There wasn't even a conversation. No, Mia, how are you feeling about this? Or, are you even comfortable? It was just assumed. I went along with the initial testing partly to avoid a confrontation, but also with a tiny, selfish sliver of hope that I wouldn't be a match. If I wasn't, then at least I wouldn't have to navigate the mess this was sure to create. Of course, fate had other plans. I was a perfect match. And the moment those results were delivered, the unspoken agreement hung thick in the air, like I'd already been prepped for surgery. Mom's eyes welled up, and she squeezed me tight. Dad gave me a hearty clap on the back, proclaiming, "We knew you wouldn't let us down, honey." Blake, he just gave a curt nod like, "Well, duh. What else would she do?" A wave of nausea washed over me. I tried to broach the subject gently, mentioning that this was a significant decision, something I needed time to process, that I wasn't entirely sure. Mom immediately cut me off. "Mia, he's your brother. You don't hesitate when it comes to family." Her words weren't a question but a decree. Dad just huffed, shaking his head as if I'd sprouted a second head. "What do you mean you're not sure? What kind of person hesitates when their own flesh and blood needs them?" That's when the walls started closing in. Desperate, I dove into research, trying to understand exactly what kidney donation entailed. I knew it was major surgery, but I was ignorant about the potential risks, especially my risks. I have some pre-existing health conditions that complicated things significantly. My doctor explained that my recovery wouldn't be the typical bounce back in a few weeks scenario. I was looking at months, and even then, my body wouldn't be the same. I'd be at a higher risk for kidney disease myself. The chances of long-term complications were elevated. And if, heaven forbid, something ever happened to my remaining kidney, I'd be in serious trouble. Then there was the financial aspect. I'm drowning in student loans and stuck in a job that offers zero paid medical leave. This wasn't just about giving up a kidney. It was about sacrificing my income, my stability, my ability to support myself. I could end up buried under debt, all because my parents expected me to jump without question. As I dissected all of this, a chilling realization dawned. Not once had my parents or Blake considered how I felt. No one asked if I was scared, if I had any concerns. There was no quiet moment of "Mia, this is your choice, and we support you no matter what." Because to them, it wasn't a choice. It was an obligation. I wasn't their daughter. I was a convenient solution. I desperately clung to the hope that I was wrong, that if I explained everything, they'd understand, that they'd see the unfairness of their expectations, that they'd finally see me. So, I steeled myself, gathered them together, took a shaky breath and said, "I don't think I can do this." The room fell silent. Mom's face froze, like her brain short-circuited, refusing to process my words. Dad blinked, a puzzled expression on his face, like I'd started speaking in tongues. And Blake just exhaled loudly, shook his head, and muttered, "Of course, typical Mia. What do you mean you don't think you can do this?" Mom's voice was sharp, accusatory, as if I'd just made some outlandish claim. "I mean," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I've been talking to my doctor, and it's not a simple surgery for me." The risks felt immense, and the doctor had been clear. Recovery could take months. Months away from work. "Dad, He cut me off with a dismissive scoff. "What's the big deal? People donate kidneys all the time. They bounce right back." I tried to keep my voice level, masking the tremor of fear that was starting to build. "Not everyone does, and my doctor thinks my situation is different. This isn't just a quick recovery. It's potentially a long one, and frankly, financially." "Oh, don't even start with the money," Mom practically yelled, pushing back from the table so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "This is about Blake's life, Mia. How can you even think about finances right now? Because it's my life too." I wanted to scream, because I'm the one who would be dealing with all of this. I hadn't even been given a real choice in any of this. Before I could say a word, I felt it, that familiar shift in their expressions. The way their faces hardened, the moment they realized I wasn't just hesitant. I was truly considering saying no. And instantly, I wasn't their daughter, I was the obstacle. Blake just rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath, but I could hear it. Unbelievable. I turned to him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Blake, this isn't personal. You're making it personal," he snapped back, already on his feet. "You're choosing to let me die. That's not what I'm doing. I need time to think about this." The words felt weak even to my own ears. What's there to think about? Dad's voice was suddenly cold and sharp. This is your brother, Mia. He'd do it for you. I actually laughed. A short, bitter sound, because it was the most blatant lie I'd ever heard. Would he? I asked, looking directly at Blake. Would you, Blake? If our roles were reversed, would you give me your kidney? His eyes flickered to our parents for the briefest fraction of a second. A telltale sign, before he mumbled, That's not the point, right? Of course, it wasn't. I could see Mom struggling to contain her anger. I can't believe you're doing this, she whispered, her voice cracking. After everything we've done for you. And there it was, the guilt trip in full force. Dad launched into a detailed list of every expense they'd ever incurred on my behalf. School tuition, clothes, countless doctor's appointments. Mom started to cry, repeating, How could you do this to us? Over and over, like I'd committed some unforgivable transgression. They called me ungrateful, selfish, a disappointment. Then Blake delivered the final, cutting blow. You know what, Mia? He said, his voice laced with cold disdain. I always knew you'd be useless when it actually mattered. It hurt, not because I genuinely expected any better from him, but because a tiny, pathetic part of me still held onto some absurd hope. A montage of my entire childhood flashed before my eyes. Every time I cheered for him at his games. Every time I'd given up something I wanted so he could have it instead. I'd always put him first because it was simply expected of me. Now, the second I dared to prioritize myself, the second I even considered my own well-being, I was suddenly worthless in his eyes. I felt something inside me crack. I just mumbled that I didn't want to talk about it anymore and started to walk away. It should have ended there, but Mom wasn't finished. She grabbed my arm as I headed for the door, her grip surprisingly tight. Her nails dug into my skin, and her face was contorted with an expression I'd never seen before. You are his sister, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You were born to help him. I froze, stunned. I don't know what my face showed, but the instant those words left her mouth, she released my arm as if she had been burned. What? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She stepped back, wiping her face, avoiding my gaze. Dad was suddenly unnaturally still. Even Blake shifted uncomfortably. A knot formed in my stomach. What do you mean I was born to help him? The silence pressed down, heavy and suffocating. I glanced at my dad, a blank wall. Then at Blake. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom's clipped, You're being dramatic. And the way she turned away stung. I wasn't imagining the undercurrent. I felt it viscerally. Something was terribly wrong. I don't even remember grabbing my keys, my purse, whatever I needed to leave the house. One moment I was in the kitchen, the next I was behind the wheel, driving aimlessly. Nausea churned in my stomach. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled into a gas station, the words echoing in my head. You're being dramatic. Why those words? Why that tone, as if she was stating a simple fact? And why the reactions from Dad and Blake? As if I'd stumbled upon a secret I wasn't meant to know. Aunt Melissa's house felt like the only safe haven. I drove there on autopilot, fighting to keep it together. I must have looked a mess when she opened the door. No questions, just a warm, enveloping hug and, Stay as long as you need, honey. Sleep was impossible that night. By morning, I was running on pure adrenaline and frayed nerves. At Melissa's kitchen table, I spilled it all, every word, every flicker of expression, every agonizing second of that conversation. I half expected her to brush it off, tell me I was overreacting, that my parents were just stressed, saying things they didn't mean, but she didn't. Instead, she sighed, rubbed her temples with a weary gesture, and said, Mia, there's something you need to know. My stomach clenched. The hesitation in her voice was a physical weight. I braced myself. Your parents didn't have you because they wanted another child. They had you because Blake needed a bone marrow donor. I stared, waiting for the punchline. For her to say she'd misheard, misunderstood. But her expression remained grave. When he was 4, he got very sick. They were desperate, searching for a match. They couldn't find one, so they made one. The words hit me, I understood the meaning, but my brain refused to accept them. Planned. I was planned, not out of love, not even by accident, but out of necessity. A wave of memories washed over me, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. The feeling of always being on the periphery. The muted celebrations of my achievements. The subtle, constant reminder that Blake came first. It wasn't favoritism. It was the cold, hard truth of my existence. They never told you, Melissa confirmed gently, her expression unreadable. They never intended to. They raised you to believe this was normal. They didn't think you ever needed to know. I was speechless. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn their love, believing that if I just tried harder, I could finally matter to them, the way Blake did. But I never had a chance. I was never meant to be anything more than a potential medical resource. I barely registered what Melissa said after that. Just fragments, apologies for not telling me sooner, as if it was her fault. It wasn't. She hadn't been the one living a lie. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to go home. I ignored my parents' calls, the texts, the voicemails piling up. I needed to process this, to figure out how to navigate a world that had just been irrevocably altered. My parents were acting like everything was normal, as if we hadn't just had the most earth-shattering argument of our lives. Mom's messages were strangely soothing, almost too understanding, like she was placating a child throwing a temper tantrum. She knew I was overwhelmed, she said, and trusted I'd make the right decision with time. Dad's texts were short, but equally unsettling. We're ready to talk when you are. Family sticks together. You know what's expected. And Blake, of course, remained silent. He didn't need to say anything. In my mind, there wasn't a choice to be made. A week crawled by, and their reaction shifted dramatically when they realized I wasn't caving. Mom's messages morphed. Her disappointment practically saturated every syllable. Dad abandoned any pretense of being understanding. You're making him suffer for no reason. This is the kind of thing you'll regret forever, he'd said. The kindness had vanished, replaced by a relentless pressure. They were simply waiting for me to break, to yield. I blocked their numbers. I'm not sure what part of me expected them to respect that boundary. The blocking bought me a few days of silence, but it was a silence that felt too profound, like the stillness before a storm unleashes its fury. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, anticipating something, though I couldn't define what. My aunt assured me I was doing the right thing, that I needed to prioritize myself, but I noticed the way she studied me, a sense of expectancy in her gaze, as if she was waiting for me to shatter. Perhaps she believed I would eventually capitulate, that I would suddenly emerge from whatever rebellious phase I was in and revert to being the daughter my parents envisioned. And honestly, a small, insidious part of me wondered if she was right, because as much as I resented their actions, as much as I had every justification to cut ties, it still felt unnatural to not care, to not feel some sense of obligation. It felt like I was violating some unspoken contract that had been imposed on me since birth. Then, on a totally ordinary Tuesday night, the storm broke. I was pulled over on my way to work. I wasn't speeding. My registration was current. I wasn't distracted by my phone. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for the traffic stop, but when the officer approached my window, he wasn't interested in a traffic violation. "Ma'am, we received an anonymous tip regarding illegal substances in your vehicle. I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the car." My entire body turned to ice. "What?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely audible. "Step out of the car, please." I was confident I had nothing to hide. I had never engaged in any illegal activity in my life, but the way he phrased it, the way he looked at me as if my guilt was already predetermined, made my hands tremble as I unfastened my seatbelt and exited the vehicle. They searched my car thoroughly, and then, hidden beneath my driver's seat, they discovered a small plastic bag filled with drugs. I had never laid eyes on that bag before. I had no idea where it originated, but the instant I saw it, the realization hit me. I knew exactly what had transpired. I barely registered the officer's words about needing to take me in for questioning. I was consumed by trying to piece together the puzzle of how they had executed this. It had to be my parents, but a sliver of doubt remained. They escorted me to the station, but I wasn't officially under arrest yet. I repeated the same statement repeatedly. It's not mine. I've never seen it before. I'm sure someone set me up. And then, after what felt like an eternity suspended in dread, the officer sighed and said, "There are security cameras in that parking lot, right?" I almost collapsed from the sheer relief that washed over me. It took what felt like an age to review the footage, and with each passing second, I could feel my entire life hanging precariously on the edge of a cliff. If the cameras hadn't captured anything, if they couldn't establish my innocence, then what would happen? Would I be terminated from my job? Would I face criminal charges? Would my parents swoop in to bail me out, only to utter those dreaded words? "See, you need us now. Just do what we're asking." But then finally, one of the officers nodded, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, and said, "Found something." I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, as they brought up the footage. And there, in plain sight, was Blake. He wasn't even trying to be discreet. He crouched down next to my car, cast furtive glances around a few times, then swiftly slid the bag under my seat with practiced ease, as if he had performed this act countless times. I was torn between wanting to scream in outrage and bursting into hysterical laughter. The officers exchanged knowing glances. One of them nodded in affirmation. "She's free to go," he said. "But we're going to have to bring him in." The next few hours dissolved into a disorienting blur. The station felt like a void, and I was trapped inside it. Blake hadn't fought back, hadn't even offered a flimsy excuse. The script was already writing itself in my head. Remorseful act, a mumbled mistake, blaming his fragile emotional state, and then the grand finale, my parents swooping in to ensure he got a slap on the wrist, at best. True to form, they arrived within the hour, radiating fury, but not directed at their golden boy. No, it was all for me. Mom launched into her practice performance, sobbing into a tissue, her voice amplified to ensure everyone in the station bore witness to her suffering. "He's sick," she wailed repeatedly. "He's not himself. You have to understand." As if that excused anything. Dad's anger was a tidal wave crashing over me. "You drove him to this," he accused, his eyes holding something I couldn't decipher, a disturbing mix of blame and something else. "You made him desperate." I just stared, numb. "Are you serious?" The words were barely a whisper, too controlled, too dangerous. "You saw the video. He tried to have me arrested. And you're blaming me? He wouldn't have done this if you just cooperated." Mom snapped, dabbing at tears that seemed suspiciously dry. "You backed him into a corner, Mia. He had no other choice." In that moment, witnessing their frantic defense of Blake, something inside me shattered. For years, I'd allowed them to chip away at my self-worth, making me feel selfish for daring to have my own aspirations, subtly implying that if I just tried harder, became a better daughter, they might finally love me the way they adored Blake. But here I was, standing in a police station, confronted with undeniable proof that my brother had tried to destroy my life, and they still chose him. There was never going to be a version of reality where they would choose me, and I was done playing along. I turned to Mom, my voice a stranger to my own ears. "You did this?" I said, the words laced with a bitterness I hadn't known I possessed. "You made him this way." She blinked, clinging to her devastated mother routine. "What are you talking about?" She sniffled, shaking her head as if I was speaking in tongues. I took a step closer. "Aunt Melissa told me," I said, watching her closely. "She told me why you had me." The transformation was instantaneous. The fake tears vanished as if someone had flipped a switch. Dad, who had been standing rigidly beside her, seemed to freeze completely. "I don't know what she told you, but she's always tried to turn you against us." A short, harsh laugh escaped my lips. "That's your defense?" I asked, stepping closer, forcing them to meet my gaze. "That she lied? Tell me the truth," I demanded. "Did you have me just to be a donor for Blake?" Mom darted a look at Dad, but neither of them spoke. The anger surged within me, a hot, suffocating wave. Say it. She met my gaze, her chin lifting slightly, defiantly. We did what we had to do, she said, her voice brittle. You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for Blake. The words landed with a heavier impact than I'd anticipated. Intellectually, I already knew. Aunt Melissa had revealed the truth, and deep down, it explained so much. It clarified a lifetime of subtle cues and unspoken preferences, but hearing Mom articulate it so casually, as if it were an indisputable fact, as if I were being unreasonable for even questioning it, still stung with an unexpected force. I'd spent my entire life trying to decipher why I always felt like an outsider within my own family, and now I had my answer. I glanced at Dad, half expecting him to offer some softening remark, perhaps a denial or an attempt at justification, but he remained silent. No hesitation, no hint of guilt, just a cold, matter-of-fact declaration. We saved his life. That was always the priority. Not me, never me. So that's it. I asked, the words more of a soliloquy than a question directed at them. That's all I ever was to you? A backup plan? Mom didn't even flinch. If anything, she looked impatient, as if she were weary of the conversation and eager to move on. We raised you. We gave you everything you needed. Their words echoed, hollow and accusatory. You had a home, food, and education. And now when it's your turn to step up for this family, you're turning your back on us. The audacity of it all struck me as almost comical. Oh, so now I'm part of the family? I couldn't help but laugh. A bitter, humorless sound. You didn't want me. You just needed me. It was a distinction they had made abundantly clear my entire life. One of the officers cleared his throat, a subtle reminder of the cold, sterile environment of the precinct. If you're done, we have charges to process. My mother pivoted towards them, her attention shifting so quickly it was as though I'd vanished. You don't understand, she pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. My son, he was just desperate. He wasn't thinking clearly. It was always about him. I glanced at the officer. His expression remained impassive. The security footage speaks for itself, ma'am. Then my father changed his tune. Instead of continuing to defend Blake, he took a step towards the officer, his tone suddenly conciliatory. We can work something out. There's no need for all this. We don't want to escalate things. He was negotiating, as if Blake's attempt to frame me was a mere inconvenience, a minor setback that could be smoothed over with the right words and a little cash. That was the breaking point. That was the final confirmation of everything I already knew, deep down. I turned to the officer, my decision solidifying in my mind. I'd like to press charges. My mother gasped, a sharp intake of breath like I had physically struck her. Mia, you wouldn't. My father's voice hardened. You're making a mistake. I met his eyes, unflinching. No, I stated, my voice steady. The mistake was ever thinking you cared about me. And with that, I was done. I walked out of that police station over a year ago, and every day since then has been an exercise in rebuilding, in defining myself outside of their suffocating expectations. In the beginning, it felt unreal, like I was suspended in a state of anticipation, waiting for them to appear, to drag me back into the role they had assigned me. But the further I got away, the more I came to a terrifying realization. They weren't going to change. This wasn't a phase. It was their very essence. They had always been like this. I was only now, finally, seeing it clearly. Blake remained in prison, at least for the time being. My parents exhausted every resource trying to secure his release, but their influence and their finances had limits. They mortgaged their house, bled their savings dry, all for their precious son. I held onto a sliver of hope that witnessing the gravity of the situation would shock them into a different course, that they would finally, belatedly, leave me alone. But I was wrong. Their next move? A GoFundMe campaign. I wish I were exaggerating. My mother fabricated this elaborate, heart-wrenching narrative about how I had abandoned them in their time of need and how Blake was unjustly accused. She portrayed herself as the grieving mother of a sick child, struggling to hold the family together while her selfish daughter destroyed everything. And, predictably, people bought it. Distant relatives, family friends, even total strangers flooded the site with donations and comments, condemning me for my supposed cruelty, reminding me that family comes first. I was tempted to ignore them, to let them continue down their self-destructive path and simply move on. But then, one evening, as I was sitting with my Aunt Melissa in her kitchen, she looked at me with a hesitant hope. "We should talk to your old doctor." I frowned, confused. "What doctor?" "The one they used to take you to when you were little, the family doctor. He might have records. Proof." I didn't need proof. I knew what they were capable of. But if there were documented records, undeniable evidence of their actions, maybe, just maybe, I could prevent them from manipulating others in the future. So we tracked him down. Dr. Evans had retired years ago, but when we explained the reason for our request, he agreed to meet with us. I wasn't expecting much. Perhaps a few confirming details. A validation that I wasn't imagining things. But what he revealed was far worse than anything I had imagined. I wasn't their second child. I was their fourth attempt. They had conceived 3 babies before me, 3 pregnancies, 3 terminations, each one ending the moment genetic testing revealed the fetus wasn't a perfect match for Blake. They weren't trying to give him a sibling. They were trying to create one. I felt a wave of nausea. My entire life, I had held onto the hope that beneath their cold facade, there was some semblance of love, that if I had been better, if I had tried harder, I would have earned their affection. But I never had a chance. I wasn't born because they wanted me. I was born because I was the first successful one. Melissa held my hand as I sat there, struggling to breathe, while Dr. Evans passed me those old records, medical files, letters, things I'm sure my parents believed would stay locked away forever. Holding them, I felt this strange mix of dread and resolve. I knew what I had to do. I gathered everything and sent it all to the authorities. Once the investigation gained momentum, it was like a runaway train. That fertility doctor who helped them, he lost his license almost immediately. And the really sickening part? My parents weren't the only ones involved in this. Other families, other children conceived through anonymous donors under similar shady circumstances. The scandal just exploded. My parents, they lost absolutely everything. The online donations completely stopped. Family members, those who had been so quick to defend them, simply disappeared. Their names were dragged through the press, and instead of facing the truth, admitting what they'd done, they just dug in deeper. My dad started calling it fake news, some kind of conspiracy. My mom claimed they were being unfairly persecuted for being loving, good parents. And Blake, my brother, he was sitting in prison, still playing the victim, still acting like he had no responsibility for any of it. For a long time, I actually believed they would just vanish into the mess they'd created and finally leave me alone. But they had one more card to play, one last manipulative stunt left. I remember the night my cousin Jenna called, her voice shaking. "Mia, have you heard? Blake. He tried to kill himself." A cold weight settled in my chest, a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "I just saw your mom's post online. She's saying he couldn't cope anymore, that he's in critical condition, that if I have any love left for my family, I should go and see him." For a moment, I was completely numb. I desperately wanted to believe it was a lie, another calculated move. But what if it wasn't? What if, despite everything he'd done, he truly had reached his breaking point? So I had to know the truth. I called the prison. I didn't ask for any details. I absolutely refused to be drawn into another one of their games. I only asked one question: "Is my brother alive?" The officer on the phone sounded almost indifferent when he replied, "Yeah, he's fine." I slowly released the breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Is he in critical condition?" A beat of silence, and then, "Not even close." That was all I needed. The confirmation. They were lying again. They had manufactured a suicide attempt just to manipulate me, to guilt me into coming back into the fold. I wasn't even surprised, not really. They had never cared about the truth, only about having control. I didn't respond to them, I didn't acknowledge their existence. Instead, I forwarded my mom's Facebook post to the authorities. Within a week, My parents had absolutely nothing left. Family members finally and completely cut ties. Their remaining friends deserted them. My mom deleted all her social media accounts. My dad finally stopped fighting, stopped denying everything. It's been over a year now, and my life is unrecognizable. I moved to a new city, I found a new job, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong, like I found my place. And the best part? I'm engaged. Ryan knows everything, every single dark, twisted detail of what my family put me through, and instead of treating me like some broken, tragic story, he treats me like a person, like my feelings and experiences actually matter. And even bigger news, I'm pregnant. Initially, I was terrified. After everything I've experienced, I was overwhelmed with the fear that I wouldn't know how to be a good mother, that I would somehow repeat the same devastating mistakes my own parents made. But then Ryan said something that completely shifted my perspective. You know exactly what not to do. And he's right. This baby will never grow up questioning whether they were wanted. They will never feel like they need to earn my love or affection. They will never be treated as a pawn, as a spare part in someone else's life. They will be loved fully, completely, unconditionally. I may not have been born into a real family, but I am building one, and for the first time in my life, I am truly